Designing elections that truly reflect the will of the people go beyond simply organizing voting days. It requires deliberate framework that prioritizes credibility, inclusion, transparency, and trust from the voter registration and party primaries to election day. Logistics, result collation, and dispute resolution. Every element must be carefully structured to uphold democratic values. In the Nigerian context, persistent challenges such as logistical lapses, vote buying, post-election litigation continue to raise critical questions about the strength of our electoral system. As conversations around reform intensifies ahead of 2027, what would a truly credible electoral framework look like? What design choices, legislative actions can guarantee elections that not only work, but work for everyone? I am Shehu Musa Yar'Adua. Welcome to Electoral Reform Half Hour on NTA News 24 Abuja. This program is brought to you by the Peering Advocacy and Advancement Center in Africa with support from MacArthur Foundation. Our guest tonight is Amara Nwankpa, Acting Director General of the Shehu Musa Yar'Adua Foundation. He is a respected public policy expert and thought leader with a strong focus on participatory governance, civic technology, and climate advocacy. He has led impactful initiatives that have strengthened democratic engagements and environmental awareness in Nigeria, including the award-winning iGovernance Net platform and the Foundation's acclaimed documentaries on climate change and food security. Through this work, he continues to bridge national development goals with grassroots impact, driving inclusive, evidence-based policy conversations. Amara, welcome to the conversation.
It's a pleasure.
It's exciting, taking you out on a Saturday evening. I know how the weekend should look like for you, because yes, Monday to Fridays, I know it's always been jammed for you.
Yes,
but I'm excited you're here.
Yeah, it is an important conversation and what the effort.
So let's get to it. Yes. In your views, what are the foundational elements of a credible electoral framework for a country like Nigeria, considering our institutional weaknesses and diversities?
I think I would like to go back to your intro. You said something about design choices, and I think that's where I want to start. And to say that if you're looking at designing a credible election process, you have to framework. You have to look at three competing and sometimes conflicting factors that you have to design for. The first is universal access, and this is voters or all eligible citizens being able to participate in a process that is flexible, that is accessible, that is inclusive, and that minimizes geographic, physical, administrative, legal barriers to voting. So that's one. The second is what I would call integrity of the process. And this is that elections have to reflect the will of the people through processes that are secure, that are verifiable, that are transparent, and that prevent fraud, manipulation, and undue influence. The third one is systemic efficiency. You have to conduct elections also in a way that's financially sustainable and that minimizes political and legal costs and disruptions, but also is prudent in the use of institutional resources. So these three elements, you can't have all of them perfect at the same time. They sometimes are conflicting. Where if you, for instance, choose to focus on two, then the third one would most likely, ding you. It suffers a bit. So the process of designing this framework, you have to be very aware of what the cultural and political context is. And there has to be a conversation about what compromises or consensus are we arriving at, what trade-offs are we making, and that has to be clear to everyone. And it becomes also the basis upon which we assess ourselves at the end of the process and say, was this trade-off worth it, and then based on that, we can even, for instance, adjust certain things. So we can say, well, look, we didn't do too well when it comes to universal access. What do we do better? We didn't do too well with integrity, or we didn't do too well with systemic efficiency. So those are the things that we need to look at when we are fundamentally designing our systems. So unfortunately, with Nigeria, sometimes we talk about elections as if we can achieve all of these three things at the same time, or sometimes we obsessively focus on one, like integrity, but we forget the fact that an election where only 29% of the eligible voters decide the elections, can we really, really say that that's legitimacy? So I think that we need to look at the entire process holistically and design for all of those elements, being very conversant with the trade-offs we're making.
I really find this very interesting, and it's interesting to me because we're people of extremes. We are either extremely this way or so. I like the conversation around compromise, trade-offs, what is agreeable, in a way that can take us forward. So, but that brings us to the issue of our own realities, our political culture, because sometimes there's also people make a fetish of international standards, international. So how do we, in designing these frameworks, put the lens of our own political culture into how we look at the designs?
Well, so first of all, I think the spirit of the question is right in that before we begin to look externally, we need to look internally. We need to look at ourselves and then design a process that works for us and borrow from international standards those things that are applicable to our own specific circumstances. But I think when it comes to political culture, we really have to transform or reform our political culture. I don't think it's something that we should accept and design around. And I explain why. Our entire electoral process is focused on the political elite. We have framed it as a contest among political juggernauts.
Or they make us frame it that way?
Well, even in dominant discourse. I mean, the view that this is supposed to be about the voter, I would say is a minority view. The dominant narrative.
Amara, who brings these talking points? The talking points is released to us either by the media and through some kind of subterfuge by the politicians.
But that is exactly why we have to reform it. Because if that is what is dominating the airwaves, then we have to say something different. We have to bring the focus back to voters, because the election management body can't just be an umpire that is trying to regulate a competition between political heavyweights. They must be an organization that is prepared and focused on delivering a process that gives value to the voter, an entire experience. What is your experience on election day? INEC has to be focused on that. INEC has to be focused on winning your trust. INEC has to be focused on your own expectation as a citizen. What do I expect from the entire process, even if my candidate doesn't win? And so that culture needs to be something that we transform or we reform. And I think, of course, you share this perspective, but it now needs to be more dominant in the way the system is designed. And if I go back to what I said earlier about the trilemma, or the three competing factors, now that determines the trade-offs that we make. So for instance, with universal access, we begin to look at, if we are designing around voters, what kinds of things, what kind of flexibility do we need? What do we need in terms of inclusion? What is accessible to the voter, not what is accessible to INEC or what works for INEC. A lot of the innovations around elections are not built from a consensus process. INEC sits down and decides, okay, well, we need this more technology, and they throw it at us, and we have to adjust ourselves to these new technologies. But they are not built from ground up to look at what is it that will work for us? What is it that makes elections more flexible and more, trustworthy from our perspective?
I like the conversation, the way it's going. And how do we move from reactive reforms, to more forward-looking engagements in our electoral planning and implementation?
Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to realize that the electoral process doesn't begin and start with elections. It's an entire cycle. It's something that, right from day one, it's continuous throughout the 4-year term. We have to realize that, so that we are not waiting for, elections are close, and then we begin to start writing a new law. I mean, I think the last 3 elections or the last 4 elections have been conducted under new legislation. I think this incremental, adjustments and changes around elections, yeah, you're right. It makes the system look, reactive. But if we are conversant, if we study our own, if we fix the focus on the voters and we understand the context of the voters, we create what I would call an invariant. An invariant is something that doesn't change regardless of what. It doesn't evolve with time. Those invariants are things that you design for. You anchor a system around. It's like when you have a foundation. You build a foundation on something that is solid. And then everything that you build on top of it takes its permanence from that foundation. So that's what we need to do to prevent ourselves from being reactive, yes.
So we'll go on a break, but before we do, when I see you, I'm always seeing Amara as techie. That's how I see you. Yes. Do you think most Nigerians understand these technologies that have introduced in very simple terms, BVAS, IRF?
No. And the simple answer is no. I think that we have a problematic relationship with technology, and I keep, every time I keep saying, if you go on my, X Twitter timeline and you check, you'd see me crying, myself hoarse on that issue. We place too much trust on technology. We believe technology is neutral, but technology is not. Fundamentally, I mean, I've worked with technology for more than 2 decades. I know that technology is political. What happens with technology is that technology concentrates power in the hands of a few. What would have required 200, 300 people to do before, now one person can do it. And that doesn't matter whether it is a good thing or a bad thing. So if it is to steal the election, technology will give you the advantage. The advantage with, with a touch of a thumb. You can pretty much change something. The same thing with, so if you wanted to do something good. So technology itself is not neutral. We don't have to put trust in it. So our relationship with technology should be even suspicious, more suspicious than with manual processes.
I think even some of the most advanced countries like Germany and the rest are very, like they said, they are very suspicious of technology.
Yes, we should be.
Most of their processes have remained manual. We go on a break now, and Electoral Reform Half Hour continues shortly. Stay with us. Glad to have you back. We are still speaking with Amara Nwankpa, Acting Director General, Shehu Musa Yar'Adua Foundation. So you were talking about technology before we went on the break, and how we should be a bit nuanced in how we engage it. But I also, considering our next recurring logistical bottlenecks, what viable ways can the distribution and movement of both sensitive, non-sensitive election materials be decentralized without compromising chain of custody or data security?
Oh, well, there are lots of ideas. I mean, how much time do we have?
No, just throw in what you can.
Yeah, but I think even
having you here helps to, even if it is nuggets, that's part of what.
Yeah, well, for me, I think that an overhaul of the distribution of these systems, even the way they are acquired, even the securitization of sensitive materials needs to be rethought within the context of how Nigeria currently operates, our logistics bottlenecks,
our infrastructure.
Yes, our infrastructure as well. And so, for instance, you think about an idea where a sensitive material is actually securitized at the point of accreditation. That's a possibility. For instance, a boarding pass is a blank piece of paper until when the passengers about to check in, and then all of a sudden there's something printed on it that actually gives it, validity. The same thing can be done with ballot papers and so on, so that you don't have to print ballot papers specially and so on. Those things can be securitized at the point of where the elections actually happening. What that does is that it will reduce some of the load of having to move some of these materials from a central point to another. But there are other things that can be done. There's tracking of sensitive materials. In India, for instance, they have all the political parties will seal the sensitive materials with their own seal. So when it's moved, and you before you open it, every political party will look at their own seal to be sure that it hasn't been broken, and then that's one way to check it. So even if they put it on a door, so in a room, they will seal it. Each political party will come and put their own seal on that door. So there are different ways.
It's just exciting how trust also plays, because when political parties have to by themselves, it all has to do with election being a very divisive, something that promotes distrust. But we're currently challenged by the issue of vote trading, and that's our one big, from the obstacles to even internal party delegate elections. It's all trading, and like I said, what can we do, whether at the polling units or at the collation centers, to bring down some of these processes?
Well, I think first of all, I think fundamentally, if we redesign the process, it gives more power to the voter. One example I would like to give was in 2011, January 2011, when we restarted registration all over again. If you remember, most of us who do, we registered almost 74 million Nigerians in the space of 3 weeks. And the first 1 week of that, the registration wasn't even working. I still remember that Obasanjo's fingerprints were rejected.
Yes.
But one thing worked for INEC at the time. It was the first and the only biometric system, registration, where the person who was being registered and the person who's registering the person were facing the same way. They were looking at the same screen. By putting the voter on the same side as INEC, it created trust. And Nigerians began to feel a sense of ownership of the process. So you found people who were bringing out their generator to power the entire polling unit. You found people who built canopy around the polling unit. You found people who were bringing gala, puff, and meat pie for the, the coppers who were doing the registration. You had people who were buying ink. All of that supported the logistics of the process and brought, the power of citizens to bear on a process that would have failed, because really for that first 1 week, it was heading for failure. But Nigerians picked up the process by the scruff of the neck and made it work. So if you design the process around Nigerians, Nigerians themselves will secure the process. Nigerians will own the process. Nigeria's election is a massive logistical undertaking. INEC can't do it alone. You have to yield some of the power. You have to cede some of the power to Nigerians. And if you do, Nigerians will ensure that these elections are robust as can be.
Yeah, but I also have my concerns about that. And those concerns have to do with the politicization of everything. When you throw that open by you can do that for voter registration, because communities are invested in voter registration, because sometimes they want to up their voter register for whatever the issues. But when it comes to E-Day, that's a huge, to open up that participation in the way that you are looking, will have some challenges, don't you think so?
Well, it depends on how you conceptualize risk and your approach to risk management. So risk management, you have various ways to treat a certain risk. So if you identify something as a risk, you can either decide to avoid it, which is what we do most of the time. We say, oh, well, look, it's a risk. We avoid the risk. But sometimes you could do better by profiling that risk and knowing whether this is a risk that you want to avoid totally, or whether you want to mitigate, whether you want to have specific categories of areas where you actually prepare for the risk. Maybe the risk is not going to materialize itself everywhere, but there are certain hotspots, and you have specific strategies for that. You can also have, risk management, where you say, okay, well, look at the things we're looking for before we decide to shut down the process. There is no system that is not without risk. Even the way we are running it today, of course we can see how bad it is, but it's in the control that you have. So we look at controls, and you have to be honest about what you can control as INEC, and what you have to trust voters to control, and how you begin to check some of those things. So sometimes you could actually cure the process after the fact. So for instance, with voter registration, it wasn't that people weren't trying to cheat the system. People were actively trying to cheat the system, but the process INEC...
No, the collaboration is actually not altruistic.
Yes, but the process that INEC had was that they had business rules that after the fact you could test these fingerprints and find out if there are duplicates, and then you can phase them out before the risk eventually becomes permanent on the voter register. So there are ways in which you can design the process so that you treat the risk at the point where it is most efficient to treat the risk.
So how do we practically integrate diaspora voting without overstretching INEC's logistical,
I don't know. I mean, first, I'm torn on this issue because, first of all, our diaspora population are very invested. And they are perhaps the most financially invested in the development of Nigeria, given the size of the remittances that we get from them. So it's important for them to have a say. But then again,
so I hope we are not just talking about the European, American, Niger and Cameroon. They are all diaspora.
They still contribute, all of them.
And Sudan.
Yes. When we talk about remittances, these people are involved. People in Ghana, people in Togo, they all contribute. The Nigerians never forget Nigeria when they travel. In fact, we are more interested.
But they're not paying tax here.
Yes, but remittances kept us through COVID. I would say that remittances saved our bacon throughout the time when we had the Naira crash, because it was coming in dollars. So I would say that, I'll give them credit for that. But I will also say that, 29% voter turnout at the last elections, for instance, it shows that the problem is more at home, that we need to get more of, access for voters who are actually here in the country and who are available to vote, to bring them out for elections. So yes, it is important to open up diaspora voting, but then again, it's far more important to get more people here voting.
But there are quite a lot of other conversations that are going on around early voting for people like you who on election day, security, medical personnel, and the rest of them, and a lot of other things that could expand, and then the now topical issue about reserve seats for women.
Oh yeah, those are all very good conversations, and I think if we center the design around the voter, and we look at what the typical voters are. So for instance, a nursing mother who doesn't have any help in the house or has toddlers would need more time to vote, because who are you leaving the kids for? And you can't bring them out on election day, and so people might see you with kids and think that you've come to rig the election with child voters. So you have to look at the kinds of people you want to open this election process to, and you have to design the process to include them.
Amara, it's on this note that we will conclude our conversation on the episode of Electoral Reform Half Hour, and we wish to specially thank you, Amara Nwankpa, for your time and contributions on the program. It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you so very much.
It's been a pleasure too.
Thank you. Thank you. Electoral Reform Half Hour is brought to you by the Peering Advocacy and Advancement Center in Africa, PAACA, with sponsorship from MacArthur Foundation. We are live every Saturday from 8:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. with a repeat broadcast every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. same station. Thanks for watching. Good night.